Hi, I'm Christina Fallows, and I'm looking into the challenges to masculinity in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, looking into the critics Cohen and Dryden. Cohen looks into how Stevenson's literature brings about the struggle between what is considered normal and acceptable by late 19th century ideals of English masculinity, and how Stevenson violates these boundaries to highlight the contradictions that he believes oppose configurations of male gender identity. Cohen argues that while all men naturally and consistently ought to be men by virtue of possessing male bodies, only some men are real, insofar as they embody the appropriate class-defined, nationally inflected gender attributes. So certain qualities gave body to the Englishman. A man needed these certain attributes to be considered real. Bourgeois Englishmen took advantage of these attributes and used them as a signifier of difference to those men of the working classes, placing themselves above and embracing this power. Tensions arose around the representations of what was considered male, with challenges such as bankruptcy, labour working with the working classes, and the attempts of independence from middle-class women. These tensions began to blur the strong distinctions between the Englishman and the other, and Cohen argues that the masculine property became challenged. As a response, some way of protecting the privilege that they had fought to gain, they were forced to reimagine the naturalness of their superiority in ever more complex ways. Therefore, Cohen argues that the splitting within the male subject in order to assert new modes of self-representation became a common experience within the literature of English masculinity, that is, the modernist novel. Modernist literature focused on the inner self and the consciousness, the decline of civilization, which is ultimately what Jekyll and Hyde highlights, using masculinity as an unstable subjectivity. Linda Dryden also argues of the threat to the Englishman, but focuses more on the threat of the nation as a whole. She draws on the Victorian belief of degeneracy and the fear of reversion to the primitive other. It was believed that degeneracy could lead to atavism, and that this atavism had to be demolished so that the human race could continue to develop and evolve, probably, no doubt, into an evolved version of the gentleman. Le Bon also expressed his fear. He believed that with the downfall of the professional pillar of society, that is, the downfall of the gentleman and the Dr. Jekyll, we would deteriorate as a society and be forced to revert to the beast that we once were. Jekyll and Hyde is a novel that brings forward the concerns of the late 19th century, with the crumbling and degenerating path it appeared to be taking. Dryden claims that Stevenson works with this fear of degeneration and uses it to locate the degeneracy in the very England that the Victorian audience sees respectable. Not only this, but Stevenson brings this degeneracy into the soul of what is considered a very well-respected gentleman. This differs from the usual aim of targeting the lower classes or other countries that were seen as inferior, but targets the very soul that the Victorian public saw as respectable. This puts the entire idea of the soundness of the British race at risk. Dryden says here that Stevenson is undermining this illusion, and creates the possibility that there is, in fact, a Mr. Hyde in each and every one of us. In both essays, both Cohen and Dryden bring forward Jekyll's denial of hypocrisy. Cohen argues that Jekyll is true to himself. He is not in denial of what he is or has become. He is standing as a symbol for what is within every man, that both sides are in earnest. Cohen suggests that the novel ensures an earnestness of both sides by portraying the larger failure of character, that is, the failure of the representation of personhood, or the gentleman itself. The novel constructs an alternative for this ideal, and splits into two forms of embodiment, the creation of a double life. Dryden argues, however, that Jekyll is in fact a double hypocrite. Jekyll does recognize the evil within him, and does accept his split self into the moral and the criminal, but, as Dryden puts it, each self refuses to acknowledge the influence of the other, practicing self-deception on a grand scale. Both Dryden and Cohen also discuss Jekyll's prediction of mankind. Cohen uses Jekyll's statement as a way of understanding further the multiple determinants that are to be made in order to follow the rules and regulations of a gentleman, that is, the male subject. He says that this phrase demonstrates Jekyll's insight into the violation of his semantic integrity, and shows Stevenson's fictional and imaginary solution to the contradictions of that of the gentleman. Dryden agrees with Cohen's views to an extent. She believes that this puts forward Jekyll's belief in the multifaceted nature of humankind. She does, however, state that Jekyll's reasoning of being bound with another, and immoral along with a gentleman, demolishes any theory of a discrete criminal class. This further highlights the metropolitan fears and anxieties about moral dissipation, bringing forward yet again that there may be an evil within each of us. Both critics here, however, do view Jekyll's statement as a way of highlighting the concerns and imaginative solutions to the pressures of the Victorian society.